Power has a distinct scent. It smells of expensive leather, polished mahogany, and the absolute certainty that you can crush a lesser life without consequence. That scent choked the 50th floor boardroom of Vance Enterprises, where billionaires casually ruined my sister to save their worthless son. Sitting there, nodding along, was my own father. They think I am an invisible desk clerk, but the most dangerous wolves wear the skins of nobodies. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Autumn Weaver. The rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Seattle high-rise, blurring the gray skyline into a weeping smudge of concrete and clouds. Inside the 50th floor boardroom of Vance Enterprises, the climate control was set to a sterile, freezing temperature, perfectly designed to keep employees awake and outsiders deeply uncomfortable. Right now, it felt like a corporate meat locker. Sitting beside me at the massive mahogany table was my younger sister, Lily. She was only 22 years old, fresh out of college, with a brilliant mind and a heart far too naive for this ruthless corporate machine. Currently, she was trembling so violently that her heavy oak chair visibly vibrated against the thick designer carpet. Her eyes were swollen and violently red from hours of crying, her knuckles completely white as she desperately clutched the frayed edge of her cheap cardigan. Across the vast expanse of polished wood sat the architects of her destruction. Victoria Vance, the chief executive officer, radiated an aura of absolute zero. She wore a tailored suit that cost more than Lily earned in an entire year. Her posture was rigid, her expression carved from glacial ice. She did not look at us like we were human beings. She looked at us like an accounting error that needed to be promptly erased. Beside her lounged Marcus Vance, the arrogant heir and the chief technology officer in title only. He was a spoiled man-child placed in a position of immense power simply because of his last name. He was currently picking at his manicured nails, a faint, repulsive smirk playing on his lips. The injustice of it all burned like concentrated acid in the back of my throat. Marcus was an incompetent fraud. He had stolen the core algorithms of a proprietary software program that Lily had spent the last 18 months writing from scratch. In his pathetic attempt to show off to the board of directors, he deployed her unfinished code without running a single required security protocol. By doing so, he accidentally created a catastrophic cybersecurity vulnerability, swinging the corporate gates wide open to a massive external breach. Tens of millions of dollars had vanished overnight in a spectacular digital heist. But instead of taking responsibility like a man, the Golden Boy panicked. Using his supreme administrative privileges, Marcus systematically altered the main server logs. He fabricated digital footprints, manipulating timestamps and access codes to point directly at Lily's local workstation. He had meticulously framed a 22-year-old junior developer for the most disastrous financial hemorrhage in the entire history of the company. The Vance family's lead attorney, a man with lifeless shark eyes and a suit that smelled of expensive cologne and moral bankruptcy, slid a thick stack of papers across the table. The heavy parchment landed in front of Lily with a dull, echoing thud. It was legally framed as a settlement agreement, but it read exactly like an execution warrant. The terms were absolutely draconian. Lily was required to sign a full written confession taking sole and complete responsibility for the massive data breach. She had to issue a humiliating public apology, effectively branding herself a corporate terrorist for the rest of her life. Furthermore, she had to accept a permanent ban from the technology industry, blacklisted from ever writing a single line of professional code again, in exchange for surrendering her entire future and her dignity. Vance Enterprises would graciously decline to press federal charges. They would not send her to federal prison. It was a hostage negotiation where they held all the guns and we were completely unarmed. Lily let out a muffled sob, her tears dripping onto the pristine white paper. blurring the dense legal jargon. She looked up, desperate for a lifeline, her terrified, pleading eyes landing on the man sitting at the head of our side of the table, Arthur Weaver, our father. Arthur was a mid-level manager who had spent his entire adult life worshipping the ground the ultra-wealthy walked on. He defined his absolute worth by his proximity to power. He golfed at the right clubs, laughed loudly at the right jokes, and always bowed his head to anyone with a larger bank account. He was the kind of man who would apologize profusely if a rich man stepped on his shoes. I watched his face, praying for a tiny spark of paternal rage. I waited for him to stand up, to flip the heavy mahogany table, to grab his terrified daughter and drag her away from these monsters. Instead, Arthur Weaver nervously adjusted his silk tie. He turned his head and glared at us, his face pale with the sheer terror of offending Victoria Vance. His voice was sharp, coated in pathetic cowardice and misdirected anger. "Stop being stubborn," my father hissed, his words slashing through the quiet room like a razor blade. "Sign the apology and move on. You cannot fight the Vances." A profound, unnatural silence descended upon the room. The betrayal was so absolute, so thoroughly devastating, that it physically sucked the oxygen straight out of my lungs. My own father was willingly holding the knife to his daughter's throat, just to stay in the good graces of the billionaires holding the handle. A glacial coldness bloomed in the center of my chest, freezing the boiling anger into something hard, sharp, and infinitely dangerous. I did not look at my father. I looked straight across the table, my eyes locked directly onto Marcus Vance. His smirk had widened into a full, victorious grin. He thought he had won. He thought we were nothing but expendable trash meant to be swept under the rug. I placed my hands flat on the table and stood up. The sudden movement made the heavy leather chair squeak loudly, breaking the suffocating tension. I reached down and firmly grasped Lily's trembling hand, pulling her up with me. I stared directly into Victoria Vance's soulless eyes, keeping my voice entirely flat, devoid of any human emotion they could possibly feed on. "Thank you for wasting our time," I said, my words dropping like heavy stones onto the wooden table. "We are not signing anything." Without waiting for a single response, I turned my back on the billionaires and the coward who sired me. I gripped my sister's hand tighter, feeling her violent shaking slowly begin to subside under my steady hold, and led her out the heavy glass doors. The apartment was swallowed by thick, oppressive shadows, broken only by the sickly amber glow of the street lamps bleeding through the horizontal blinds. I sat motionless in the center of the living room, letting the absolute darkness wash over me. I was 38 years old, yet in the quiet solitude of my own home, the lifelong echoes of my father's disdain still reverberated loudly. Arthur Weaver never raised his hand to me, but he had spent my entire existence battering my spirit with his profound disappointment. In his calculated, status-obsessed mind, I was nothing more than a pathetic failure. He genuinely believed I was a low-level government information technology worker, a faceless drone trapped in a dead-end job, scraping by on a miserable state salary. I possessed no social standing, no designer wardrobe, and no wealthy husband. To a man who worshipped the gilded pedestals of the ultra-rich, my unremarkable life was an embarrassing stain on his fabricated legacy. Arthur had spent decades carefully constructing an illusion of belonging. He polished his accent, bought cars he could not afford, and dedicated his weekends to playing 18 holes of golf at the exclusive country clubs run by the likes of Victoria Vance. To him, securing a polite nod from a billionaire was the ultimate triumph. When forced to choose between the sacred approval of his wealthy masters and the very survival of his own daughters, he did not even hesitate. He threw us to the wolves without a single shred of remorse. A sharp, agonizing sob drifted from the small kitchen, violently pulling me from my thoughts. I pushed myself out of the worn armchair and walked silently across the hardwood floor. Lily was slumped over the chipped dining table, her face buried deep in her arms. A single mug of chamomile tea sat untouched in front of her, the surface perfectly still. The sheer terror radiating from her small frame was palpable, filling the cramped kitchen with a suffocating weight. He wiped everything clean. Autumn, Lily choked out, her voice barely a raw, broken whisper. She lifted her head, and the pure despair in her swollen eyes was enough to stop a heart. Marcus used his supreme administrator privileges. He scrubbed the main network drives completely dry. Every internal log, every shadow backup, every single digital footprint of his unauthorized backdoor access is permanently gone. There is no trail left. I have absolutely no way to prove I am innocent. They are going to hand me over to the authorities, and I will be locked inside a federal prison for 10, maybe 20 years. I stepped behind her chair and wrapped my arms firmly around her trembling shoulders. I pressed my cheek against her soft hair, grounding her erratic breathing with my own steady rhythm. I did not offer her empty platitudes. I did not tell her that the justice system would figure it out, because I knew perfectly well that justice was a luxury only the rich could afford. When I finally spoke, my voice was smooth, absolute, and chillingly calm. "No one can touch you," I whispered into the quiet room, the words carrying the heavy weight of a blood oath. "I promise." I stayed right there, holding her tightly in the dim light until the sheer exhaustion of the day finally overpowered her paralyzing fear. I guided her to the sofa, draped a heavy woolen blanket over her shoulders, and waited until her breathing leveled out into the deep, rhythmic cadence of sleep. Once she was secure, I walked down the narrow hallway and stopped in front of the spare bedroom. To any casual observer, or a disappointing father, it was just a locked storage closet, but the reinforced titanium core of the door and the concealed biometric scanner told a vastly different story. I pressed my thumb against the hidden glass panel beneath the doorframe. The heavy deadbolts disengaged with a solid, mechanical thud. I stepped inside the windowless, soundproof room and engaged the secondary locks behind me. The air here was constantly chilled by dedicated server racks, humming softly in the corner. I sat down at the stark metal desk and opened the heavy, matte black military laptop resting in the exact center. It was encased in ruggedized armor and protected by multiple layers of quantum encryption. I typed in a complex 72-character alphanumeric passcode, followed immediately by a highly sensitive retinal scan. The screen flared to life, casting a sharp, icy blue light across my face. The golden seal of the United States government materialized on the screen, followed swiftly by the imposing crest of the Aegis Cyber Defense Command. My father thought I was an invisible nobody. He thought I spent my days resetting passwords and fixing broken routers. He was entirely, catastrophically wrong. I was not a low-level clerk. I was the chief of cyber operations for a top-secret federal agency. I commanded an elite ghost unit dedicated to hunting state-sponsored threats and dismantling international cyber terrorism syndicates. I held security clearances so highly classified that even the president needed a briefing to understand my daily operations. And as I stared at the glowing terminal, preparing to declare a digital war, I knew exactly how I was going to use every ounce of that terrifying power. By 6 o'clock the next morning, the city was still wrapped in a thick, suffocating fog. But my makeshift command center was burning with adrenaline. I initiated a Level 5 secure uplink, bypassing standard telecommunication grids entirely, and routed a heavily encrypted audio connection through a military orbital satellite. The line clicked twice before a gruff, familiar voice answered. "It is early for a ghost hunt, Commander," David said, the static masking his exact location. He was my most trusted tactical operative, currently embedded halfway across the globe. "I need a deep extraction," I replied, my fingers already flying across the illuminated mechanical keyboard. "Target is Vance Enterprises. Their chief technology officer did a localized scrub of the main network drives, wiping his own administrative footprints. I need you to bounce a signal off the Seattle backbone routers and pull the cached data packets before the server nodes overwrite them." "Give me 30 seconds, David muttered. Marcus Vance was a rich, arrogant fool who genuinely believed that dragging files to a digital trash bin and running a basic commercial wiping software erased history. He did not understand the immutable laws of network architecture. Every single keystroke he made sent a ripple through external internet service provider nodes. Lines of raw, glowing green code cascaded down my secondary monitor. David had successfully breached the external firewall and bypassed the company's pathetic commercial security measures in under 2 minutes. "Got it," David said, his voice crisp through the encrypted channel. "I am pushing the mirrored cache to your local terminal now. Happy hunting." I severed the connection and plunged headfirst into the data. I stripped away the false logs Marcus had planted and reconstructed the true chronological sequence of the server breach. What I found within the restored data packets was not just corporate negligence, it was a massive, treasonous catastrophe. Marcus had not simply made a coding error that caused a random leak. The spoiled heir had deliberately hard-coded a sophisticated backdoor directly into the enterprise software architecture. Following the digital breadcrumbs, I traced a series of encrypted communications leading straight to the dark web. Marcus had amassed staggering gambling debts totaling nearly $5 million across multiple illegal offshore syndicates. To save his own skin, he sold the backdoor access to a notorious international cybercrime cartel. He handed a hostile foreign syndicate the master keys to the digital kingdom for a miserable payout of $200,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency. My blood ran ice cold. This was no longer a domestic corporate dispute. It was an active national security threat. Just as I compiled the final damning string of code, my encrypted burner phone vibrated sharply on the metal desk. The caller identification displayed an unknown local number, but I recognized the icy cadence immediately. "Ms. Weaver?" Victoria Vance said. Her voice was dripping with venomous confidence, slicing through the receiver like a surgical scalpel. "I hope a night of reflection has brought you and your sister some much-needed clarity." "Clarity is exactly what I have found," I replied, my tone flat and entirely unyielding. "Good," she snapped, "because my patience is utterly exhausted. If your sister does not sign the confession by 3 o'clock this afternoon, I will personally ensure the Federal Bureau of Investigation knocks down your door by dinner time. You are a nobody playing a game you do not understand. Do not throw eggs at rocks." The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen, a grim, humorless smile touching the corners of my mouth. She wanted to summon the federal authorities. She had absolutely no idea who she was threatening. A sudden violent pounding echoed from my front door. Before I could even stand up, the deadbolt rattled wildly, and my father burst into the living room. Using the spare emergency key I had foolishly given him years ago, his face was flushed with frantic rage, his chest heaving as if he had sprinted up the entire flight of stairs. "What is wrong with you?" Arthur screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria as he marched toward my workspace. "Victoria Vance just called my personal cell phone. She told me you hung up on her. Are you completely insane? You are dragging this entire family down into the mud because of your stupid, arrogant pride." He stood over me, trembling with the sheer terror of losing his imaginary social standing. "They are rich, Autumn. They have armies of lawyers. You are just a stubborn clerk. You are going to send your own sister to prison because you refuse to bow your head and apologize to your betters." I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of explanation or defense. I simply looked up at him. The absolute deadness in my eyes must have frightened him, because the frantic screaming died in his throat, and he instinctively took a step backward. I was no longer looking at my father. I was looking at a collateral casualty of a war he could not possibly comprehend. I turned my attention back to the laptop. With deliberate precision, I transferred the entire compiled dossier containing the encrypted dark web ledgers, the recovered server logs, and the undeniable proof of Marcus's treason onto a hardened titanium flash drive. I closed the heavy armor-plated lid of the laptop. I pulled up a secure messaging protocol on my secondary device, bypassing all civilian networks, and typed a single, highly classified dispatch to my tactical strike team waiting in the shadows. "The bait has been taken. It is time to reel in the net." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the atmosphere inside the 50th floor boardroom had calcified into something truly suffocating. The air felt unnaturally heavy, completely saturated with the intoxicating arrogance of the untouchable elite. The storm outside had worsened, but inside the soundproof glass walls, the only weather was the chilling dominance of the Vance family. Victoria Vance sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, like a reigning monarch presiding over a peasant execution. She did not even bother to look up when we entered, her attention seemingly fixed on a digital tablet, dismissing our presence as a mere formality. Across the table, Marcus leaned back in his plush leather chair, his legs casually crossed. He was no longer hiding his amusement. He wore the smug, untouchable smile of a predator who had cornered his prey and was now just dragging out the kill for sheer entertainment. Next to him, the corporate lawyer stood silently, tapping a thick, silver fountain pen against the pristine white pages of the confession document. The trap was set, and they were merely waiting for the final agonizing snap of the jaws. But the most oppressive, suffocating force in the room did not come from the billionaires. It came from my own father. Arthur Weaver was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He stood hovering right behind Lily, his shadow falling heavily over her slumped shoulders. His eyes were wide, darting frantically between Victoria's stoic face and the unsigned document on the table. He was terrified. He was terrified of losing his pathetic country club invitations, terrified of being associated with a scandal, and most of all, terrified of his own daughter's defiance. He leaned down, his voice a harsh, venomous whisper that carried clearly across the quiet room. "Do it now," Arthur hissed, his breath brushing against Lily's ear. "Do not make them wait another second. You sign that paper. You apologize to Mr. Vance, and you beg for their mercy. Do not ruin my life because you are too proud to admit you messed up." It was the final, devastating blow. The combined weight of the corporate threats, the legal intimidation, and the visceral, undeniable betrayal of her own father completely shattered her. Lily let out a broken, quiet gasp, all the fight drained out of her small body. She looked like a ghost, hollowed out and utterly defeated. With a trembling hand that could barely support its own weight, she slowly reached out. Her pale fingers wrapped around the cold metal of the silver fountain pen the lawyer offered her. She pulled the document closer, the tip of the pen hovering just a fraction of an inch above the dotted line that would permanently sign away her future, her freedom, and her name. I moved before the ink could even graze the parchment. I stepped forward, my hand shooting out with absolute precision. I snatched the silver fountain pen right out of her trembling grip. Before the lawyer could object, before Marcus could even blink, I gripped the ends of the expensive writing instrument and snapped it violently in half. The sharp cracking sound echoed off the thick glass walls like a gunshot, slicing right through the suffocating tension. Black ink splattered across the pristine white confession and dotted the polished mahogany wood. The entire room froze in absolute, stunned silence. Victoria finally looked up from her tablet, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in genuine shock. Marcus was the first to recover. The smug smile vanished from his face, replaced instantly by an ugly, twisting sneer of pure contempt. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a rabid animal. "You really brought this on yourself, you pathetic loser," Marcus spat, his voice dripping with venom. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his latest model smartphone. "I warned you. I am dialing the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now. You are both going to be dragged out of this building in handcuffs." The mention of the federal authorities pushed Arthur entirely over the edge. My father lost his mind. He spun around, his face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. He lunged forward, stopping just inches from me, and pointed a violently shaking finger directly into my face. "You are the most ungrateful, stupid, arrogant daughter a man could ever have the misfortune of raising," Arthur screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical rage, completely abandoning any pretense of dignity in front of his wealthy idols. Flecks of spit flew from his lips. You are murdering your own sister. You are destroying this entire family because of your massive, ignorant ego. You are nothing. You hear me? You are nothing." I let his pathetic, desperate insults wash over me like dirty rain. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to shout back. I did not even look at him. I simply stared at his screaming face with eyes so completely dead and devoid of emotion that his screaming eventually faltered into a confused, breathless silence, moving with deliberate, excruciatingly slow precision. I pulled out a heavy leather chair and sat down directly across from Victoria Vance. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat, retrieved the hardened titanium flash drive, and tossed it casually across the table. It slid over the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of Marcus, landing with a heavy metallic clatter that commanded the attention of every single pair of eyes in the room. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms over my chest, and offered them a faint, chilling smile. "Go ahead and call the authorities," I said, my voice a quiet, even murmur that easily overpowered the frantic energy in the room. Though I am afraid regular police do not have the proper jurisdiction to handle what happens next. Victoria Vance stared at the small piece of metal resting on her polished table as if it were a dead insect. A cold, dismissive laugh bubbled up from her throat, breaking the heavy silence. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure aristocratic disdain. "Is this supposed to be some sort of dramatic television moment, Miss Weaver?" Victoria sneered, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. A mystery drive pulled from the coat pocket of a disgruntled civil servant. "You are far more pathetic than I originally calculated. You honestly think a cheap plastic prop and a vague threat will force a multi-billion-dollar empire to surrender?" She did not even wait for my answer. Victoria reached across the table and pressed a silver intercom button. "Security. Send a full tactical escort to the 50th floor boardroom immediately. We have 2 hostile trespassers who need to be physically removed from the premises, and an employee who requires an escort to his car." The last part was aimed directly at my father, who visibly shrank into himself, whimpering like a beaten dog. I did not panic. I did not even blink. While Victoria was busy issuing her imperious commands, I calmly reached over and grabbed the wireless presentation remote resting near the center console. Before anyone could react to my sudden movement, I slid the titanium drive into the data port integrated into the table. I pressed a single button on the remote. The massive, high-definition projection screen covering the entire western wall hummed to life. The motorized blinds automatically snapped shut, plunging the room into a deep shadow illuminated only by the glaring white light of the projector. A cascading waterfall of raw, decrypted system architecture flooded the massive screen. These were not the neatly sanitized, heavily redacted reports Marcus had presented to his board of directors. These were the raw, bleeding server logs, ripped straight from the external routing caches before his frantic deletion protocol could scrub them from the global network. The screen displayed the exact date, the precise hour, and the undeniable administrative credentials used to bypass the primary firewall. Right there, in massive, glowing green font, was Marcus Vance's personal super-user identification string. It detailed every single unauthorized keystroke he made to crack open the digital vault, followed immediately by the undeniable transfer receipts from the dark web cryptocurrency ledgers. The transformation of Marcus Vance was a beautiful, terrifying thing to witness. The arrogant, untouchable smirk melted off his face in less than a second. The healthy, sun-kissed color drained entirely from his skin, leaving him a sickly, translucent shade of chalky white. His jaw went slack, his eyes bulging as he stared at the digital execution warrant plastered across the wall. He tried to speak, to formulate some kind of arrogant defense, but all that escaped his throat was a pathetic, choked gasp. Victoria saw her son's visceral reaction, the absolute certainty that had armored her entire existence finally cracked. Panic, raw and unfamiliar, flashed in her icy eyes, but she was a creature of immense pride, conditioned to fight her way out of any corner using sheer financial brute force. She slammed both of her hands down on the mahogany table, jumping to her feet. "This is garbage!" Victoria screamed, the carefully cultivated mask of corporate elegance shattering completely. Digital evidence can be manufactured by any competent computer science student. You think you can walk into my building and blackmail us with forged documents? My legal team will bury you so deep under federal defamation lawsuits that you will not see daylight for the next 50 years. I remained seated. I tilted my head slightly, offering her a slow, deadly smile that carried absolutely no warmth. Do you honestly believe the network architecture my sister was developing was just a normal commercial project? I asked, my voice echoing smoothly in the darkened room. Do you think a junior developer was randomly assigned to build a standalone security protocol without external dependencies? I paused, letting the crushing weight of the unknown bear down on them. It was not a corporate defense program. Victoria, it was a honeypot. The corporate lawyer gasped, physically stumbling backward as if he had been punched in the chest. He understood the term perfectly. What are you talking about? Marcus stammered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. My sister is brilliant, I continued, my gaze fixed firmly on the trembling air. But her project was unknowingly mirroring a classified federal baiting algorithm. We let it sit on your vulnerable servers. We wanted to see who would be greedy enough, and stupid enough, to try and open the back door. But we never anticipated that the chief technology officer of the company would be the one to sell the keys. The buyer you traded with on the dark web last Thursday at 2 o'clock in the morning was not a random hacker collective. You sold absolute system access to a state-sponsored cyber-terrorism syndicate. They are the exact high-value targets the United States government has been hunting for the last 3 years. The air in the room vanished. The reality of the situation crashed down upon the billionaires like a falling skyscraper. Marcus had not committed corporate fraud. He had committed high treason. Before Victoria could utter another word of denial, a low, rhythmic vibration began to rattle the thick glass windows. The sound grew rapidly, transforming from a distant hum into a deafening mechanical roar. Heavy military helicopters were descending rapidly, their massive rotors violently whipping the rain against the 50th floor glass. At that exact moment, the digital display above the private executive elevator chimed with a harsh, glaring red light. The standard security override codes were completely disabled. The heavy steel doors locked down with a massive metallic thud, sealing the room. Someone was coming up, and they were not private security. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom did not just open. They were violently kicked inward, the reinforced hinges screaming as they were ripped directly from the wooden frame. A swarm of heavily armed federal agents poured into the room, their tactical gear absorbing the harsh projector light. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision, immediately securing every exit and locking down the perimeter. The corporate security guards Victoria had so arrogantly summoned earlier were nowhere to be seen, likely already disarmed and pinned to the floor in the lobby. Striding through the center of the tactical formation was General John Sterling, the Supreme Commander of the United States Cyber Forces. He was a towering, battle-hardened man whose mere presence sucked the remaining oxygen from the room. The 4 silver stars pinned to his immaculate uniform gleamed fiercely. Victoria Vance scrambled backward, her expensive heels slipping on the polished floor. She tried to summon the last shred of her billionaire entitlement. What is the meaning of this? You cannot barge into my private property. I am a personal friend of the state governor. I have 3 federal judges on speed dial. I will have every single one of your badges for this illegal intrusion. General Sterling did not even glance in her direction. He treated the screaming billionaire as if she were nothing more than a mild gust of wind. He walked straight past the trembling corporate lawyer, walked right past a hyperventilating Marcus, and stopped directly in front of me. The Supreme Commander of the United States Cyber Forces snapped his boots together. He stood at rigid attention, raised his right hand, and delivered a crisp, perfect military salute. "Commander Weaver," General Sterling said, his deep voice carrying absolute respect. "Excellent work. Your tactical ghost unit just finished the sweep. We have successfully captured the entire enemy organization and seized their external servers. The threat is neutralized." I stood up from my chair and returned the salute. "Thank you, General." A sharp plastic clatter broke the silence. I turned my head slightly. Arthur Weaver had dropped his personal cell phone. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered, but he did not even notice. My father was staring at me with his jaw hanging completely unhinged. His eyes were wide, bulging with a mixture of absolute shock and profound, paralyzing terror. His brain was violently short-circuiting, unable to process the reality unfolding before him. The daughter he had spent 38 years calling a pathetic failure, a low-level clerk, and a worthless nobody was currently being saluted by a 4-star military general of the United States. General Sterling finally turned his attention to the Vance family. He looked down at Marcus, who was now weeping openly, tears and snot smearing across his pale face. "Marcus Vance," the general said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "You are not being charged with white-collar corporate fraud. You are being arrested under the Espionage Act. The charges are high treason and willfully aiding international cyber espionage against the United States of America. The penalty for your actions is not a fine, and it is not a slap on the wrist from a corporate judge. You will spend the rest of your natural-born life inside a federal maximum security penitentiary." 2 heavily armored federal agents stepped forward. They grabbed Marcus by his expensive suit jacket, hauled him roughly to his feet, and slammed his wrists into heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic click echoed like a final judgment. Marcus screamed, a pathetic, high-pitched wail of pure despair, begging his mother to save him as the agents dragged him forcefully out of the shattered boardroom. Victoria Vance did not save him. She could not. Her legs gave out completely, and she collapsed heavily into her leather chair. The untouchable, arrogant queen of Vance Enterprises stared blankly at the wall, her empire entirely reduced to ash in a matter of minutes. Within moments, the room was cleared of the hostile targets. The federal agents secured the perimeter outside, leaving only 3 people standing in the ruined boardroom: me, my sister Lily, and our father. Arthur Weaver swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. The vicious, screaming tyrant from 10 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place stood a small, pathetic man reeking of desperation. He took a hesitant step toward me, his hands rubbing together in a sickening display of delayed flattery. "Autumn," Arthur stammered, his voice dripping with sycophantic praise. "My God, Autumn, I had absolutely no idea. You are a military commander. Why did you not tell me we could have handled this entirely differently? I am so sorry I yelled at you earlier. You have to understand. I was just scared for our family. You know I love you girls, right?" I looked at the man who gave me half my DNA. I felt absolutely no anger anymore. I did not feel betrayal, or sadness, or even a desire to yell back. Looking at him now, stripped of his wealthy idols, I felt absolutely nothing. He was just a stranger. I reached out and gently placed my hand on Lily's shoulder, pulling her close to my side. She was no longer crying. She stood tall, finally breathing free air. "You just keep apologizing and moving on." "Father," I said, my voice completely empty, carrying the absolute finality of a closed door. "As for us, we are not walking the same path as you anymore." I did not wait for his response. I did not look back to see the ultimate regret washing over his face as he realized he had just lost both of his daughters forever. I turned around, keeping my hand firmly on my sister's shoulder, and together, we walked out through the shattered wooden doors. We left Arthur Weaver standing completely alone in the ruins of the boardroom, while we stepped forward into the bright, undeniable light of our freedom. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it, as an ad-free channel. Your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.